Hello, and welcome back to the Managerial Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Farr, and today we will be discussing the gender pay gap. Now, I think most of us are at least somewhat familiar with this topic, but I don't think that we realize just how serious this issue really is. So, the United States was built upon the concept of freedom and equality, or at least that's what we think, right? According to the history books, women became newly considered equal to men as a result of the women's suffrage movement in the early 1900s. Though this was a significant step forward for women's rights at the time, they were still far from equal to men. Fast forward to present day, and it's still apparent that equality across genders has yet to be achieved. Today, women make up nearly half of the workforce in the United States. An interesting fact, there are more women with college degrees than there are men. Not only do they earn more college degrees, but they also hold higher GPAs in the process. Yet they're not paid as much as men are. Even in identical positions in the same industries, women earn less than their male counterparts. Interesting. Today we will analyze the gap in pay between women and men in the United States and address the question, why do women make less than men? So, in order to get the full picture here, we need to look at the history of the pay gap and a few critical events that took place during the early years. Now, this is not a new phenomenon by any means. Rather, it's been an issue in the United States for quite some time. It all started back in 1869 when the New York Times received a letter from a government employee. Yes, a female government employee for the record. This letter expressed concern regarding the unequal compensation of female government employees and asked, why are we paid less than men are? The woman noted that the government employed hundreds of female employees in her same department, and all of them collectively made nearly half as much as compared to their male counterparts. This letter sparked a battle that made it all the way up to the House of Representatives. A resolution was passed, however, was unable to carry enough momentum to make it much further or make any significant impact at the time. About a decade later, in the early 1880s, the spark was reignited on the public platform. Communications were hindered across the nation when a large group of Western Union Telegraph Company employees decided to go on strike. Part of the strikers' agenda was to demand equal pay for equal work, meaning that men and women performed the same work but were not equally compensated. Ultimately, the strike was not successful at narrowing the pay gap. However, it was successful at making the issue visible to the public and played a pretty crucial role in the early stages of the demand for equal pay across genders. By the early 1900s, the equal pay movement began to see more and more progress. For example, in 1911, female teachers in New York were finally granted equal pay after a lengthy battle with the New York Board of Education. Shortly after, in the early 1920s, World War I had a positive impact on the movement by boosting the opportunity for women to enter the workforce as men were encouraged to go off to war. The equal pay movement tasted another victory with the passing of the Equal Pay Act in 1963. This act, compounding off of the late equal work, equal pay movement, was designed to eliminate the gender pay gap altogether. The Equal Pay Act was successful in that it sparked numerous other equality-based movements. However, it was not successful in its goal of ultimately eliminating the gender pay gap. Although the government now mandated wage equality, there were still avenues around it. For example, employers knew that they had to equally compensate women. They had to pay them more. So they began to be more reluctant to hire women altogether. And so, although the gap is narrowing, it is still a legitimate issue, and experts say it'll still be quite some time before or even if the gap closes. So this begs the question of, why is there a gap in pay among genders? Part of the reason as to why roots deeply into the common views of the American society. Americans have a perceived ideology of how the male and female roles should be played, commonly referred to as traditional family roles. Traditional views of how the man and woman, respectively, fit into the family unit. The man is perceived as the breadwinner, the alpha, the one who traditionally earns the income for the family, while the woman is perceived as the caretaker, taking on more feminine and family-oriented roles, regardless of whether or not she is equally as capable as the man is of bringing home the bread. This image of the traditional family roles has created a bit of discrimination, and we saw it throughout the entire history of the women's rights movement, and unfortunately, we still see it in the workplace today. Another reason as to why stems from what is called occupational segregation. This basically means that women are funneled into different types of jobs based on their perceived gender norms, like we talked about earlier. These women's jobs are jobs like home health aides, teachers, childcare workers, jobs that have historically been made up of mostly women, as opposed to male dominated jobs such as trades and construction and so forth, which typically offer higher pay and more benefits in comparison to the quote unquote women's jobs. Another factor is a difference in hours worked. This is a big one. Statistically, we see that the greatest gender pay gaps in jobs where it is more difficult to climb the ladder if the employees need flexibility in and where they work. These are jobs that are highly demanding and require long hours at the office. Now, this does not mean that men work more hours than women because they're more driven or have more stamina or something. No, this means that women tend to work fewer hours to accommodate for their natural caregiving and family oriented activity. Men don't give birth and take maternity leave usually, but women do, usually more than once. And I'm not saying that the entire blame for the gender pay gap can be placed on women wanting to spend more time with their families, but I am saying that the gender gap is partially a result of highly demanding schedules in the workplace. The woman wants to spend more time with her family, and rightfully so. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of jobs in this day and age will accommodate that. But for others, there is just no substitute for time in the office. Although I don't necessarily feel the need to pitch the importance of gender balance and equality here, I feel like it should go without saying that all employees, regardless of gender or racial or cultural differences, should be fairly and equally compensated. But the truth is, they're not, and we're still faced with this issue. So yes, I'm going to pitch the importance of having a gender balanced workplace because it's significant and can make a world of difference in a company. Gallup's It's the Manager tells us gender-balanced work groups have a greater capability of getting work done and meeting customer expectations. And on average, women are more engaged than men, and female managers tend to have more engaged employees than male managers. This can all be summed up to two words: improved productivity. With improved productivity comes increased growth and innovation. And as word gets out that you have a fair, equal, productive, gender balanced culture, you'll develop an improved reputation for your company. And with that improved reputation comes better recruitment of new and higher quality talent. See where I'm going here? And then it all starts over again. That new talent brings even more productivity and better growth and better innovation and so forth. And this just keeps snowballing. And this really, it leads to improved retention rates. Your people will stay longer and work harder for you, and you'll have a more stable workforce altogether. But most importantly, you'll have a happier and more satisfied group of employees. Tips and best practices for helping to eliminate the gender pay gap in your workplace. Number one, obviously, is to have more women in leadership. To make the transition, there has to be a commitment from senior level leadership in the organization. These leaders need to make a public commitment to expanding recruitment and promotion of women. Once the commitment is made, it will be up to everyone in the organization to hold the leaders accountable for their commitment. Number two, there needs to be a high level of transparency regarding how promotions and pay structures are tied to legitimate qualifications. Establish clear goals, because what gets measured gets done. When you're setting salaries for new employees or current employees being promoted, conduct market research on average pay rates and use objective measures versus subjective measures like their previous salaries. Include a specified salary range in job postings and during the interview phase instead of inquiring about their previous salary. This will put the focus on already specified salary ranges and avoid the person's previous salary level causing any bias or having any influence on their future pay rate. When standards are more objective and measurable, it can help eliminate bias, whether it's gender or racial or who's closest to the boss. None of that will matter if goals and criteria are clearly established. Well, that's about all we have time for today, guys. Thanks for listening, and remember, do your part. Big or small, you can make a difference in your organization and the lives of so many people around you. So be confident and do your part. Again, thanks for listening. I'm Dylan Farr with the Managerial Communications Podcast, and we'll see you next time.